Ollie is our witch, wizard, fairy gremlin in the background who's going to be looking after everything. So he's going to drop off in a couple of seconds. If you're watching this live, we're just going to wait 3-4 minutes to make sure that everybody can get logged in and get sorted and get it seen. So if you're watching afterwards, if you're watching the recording of this, please hold fire, maybe skip forward 2 or 3 minutes until you see the Octopus logo disappear, and then we'll be all good. In the meantime, if you are with us live, if you want to go grab a coffee, grab a tea, it is a Tuesday night, isn't it, Cyril?
I think so.
Night. Yeah.
I think so.
Amazing. Jump on, grab a coffee, grab a tea, maybe your dinner, and come and join us while we discuss more around electric vehicles and the best questions that we've had from the past month or so. He's going to be looking after everything, so he's going to drop off in a couple of seconds. If you're watching this live, I'm going to cancel that. I don't know where that's come from, but we should be all good. Give me 2 seconds and I'll get that sorted.
I don't know if it's worthwhile asking people what they're eating for dinner if they want to let us know, because I haven't really had my dinner yet, so I'll be interested to know what people are eating. And if anyone having anything a little bit strange.
Sorry, Cyril, I was trying to fix what was going on there with some other stuff. What were you saying?
No, I was just saying if anyone wants to let us know what they're having for their dinner as well, that'd be great.
You love your food, right?
Give me one because I haven't eaten yet. Not that I'm always interested in food, FYI.
Amazing. The other thing that's happening today is, as I said, Ollie, who dropped off, you won't see him now. He is watching on the YouTube. He can see all the comments coming in as well. Now, we've got some questions that are already sent in to us, some of them from Cyril's customers himself, and some from you guys as you booked in to join the workshop. But also, if you're live and you have an amazing question, please do ask it. And Ollie will fire it through to us through the magic of the internet. And Cyril and I will then be able to answer it live and make sure that we're all good and get you sorted there. Fantastic. Fantastic. What are you having for dinner tonight, Ollie? Cyril. Wow. Wow.
Don't know if I should tell you after that, Charlie. If I'm honest.
I know. Sorry.
Oh, that's brilliant. What do I actually have? I had something really boring. I had like some chicken and couscous. That tells you how far out I pushed the boat tonight. And the meat was really dry as well. Oh. The only person I can blame is me because I cooked it.
Amazing.
Nothing worse than dry chicken.
I think my housemate's making a pasta bake, so I'm quite excited for that.
You like a pasta bake?
Yeah, well, I can't have lasagna because of certain things.
Oh, yes. Divulge too much.
Had to rearrange on the fly when she found that out. She was like, "Oh, lasagna sheets without egg." So yeah, amazing.
Cool.
Amazing. So I think we've given people 3 minutes to get logged on. We've given people the chance to get sorted. What we'll do is we'll get kicked off and get started. But first, I'm going to end the screen sharing so you can see Cyril and I as we talk about electric vehicles. Now, first up, before we get into anything else, I just wanted to discuss why we're here and what we're looking to learn about. But first up, it would also be really cool if, Cyril, do you want to introduce yourself, maybe why you came up with this idea or what you were thinking about, and what you see day to day working for Octopus electric vehicles?
I don't know. So to give you an understanding, obviously I'm in sales in Octopus electric vehicles, but we like to call ourselves electric vehicle specialists. And the reason behind that is majority, we like to think of ourselves as like we are educating the customer first before we go into selling the car, because there's something, and I think me and Charlie strongly agree on this, is making sure it's the right vehicle for the person and making sure that the person's ready to get into an EV, because certain lifestyles for certain people, you haven't got a car that's appropriate for them currently in the market, which I'm sure is going to change in a couple of years, probably in the next 6 months, if we're completely honest. So I had probably, I'll say it was a week where I had an influx of questions from customers that were pretty much the same, but it was evident that there wasn't a place where they could actually have these questions answered. I mean, it's all good and well sometimes asking a salesperson, but sometimes when you're at work, you don't have that privilege of having that call with someone and have that chat. So I spoke to Charlie and we were bouncing ideas, and I'm like, wouldn't it be great if we could have a place where we could discuss these questions, answer them, and people would actually ask more questions? Because what we found in our workshops was the greatest bit was the Q&A bit. That's when you found out what customers were actually thinking and what they actually wanted to know. So this is where this idea has come from. It's a place where we can chat about EVs, tell you what we know, and then you can ask us questions, and then we can hopefully educate you a little bit more.
Yeah, amazing. I think we've got about 10 questions to go through, but
Brilliant.
obviously we are looking for you folks to get involved and send us in your questions. That would be amazing. I think to come back to what Cyril said at the very beginning, for me, joining Octopus was all about helping people choose the right car for them. And actually a lot of the time people don't know what they need. They know what they want, but they don't know what they need. And I think that's very important for Cyril and I. The other thing that's super important for me is that we get you into an electric vehicle as swiftly as possible. Now, I choose those words really carefully. I don't say as quickly as possible because that sort of suggests that we're bundling you in and you're getting in too quickly and maybe something's not quite right. But swiftly is that idea of like a figure skater. It's smooth, it's easy, it's accessible. And also, it's all about making sure that it's right and that you're comfortable. I think something moves swiftly, you're comfortable with it. Something moves quickly, you maybe aren't quite as comfortable there as well. For me, what's super important is that we make sure we get you in A, the right car, and B, at the right time frame. And we get you in that car as swiftly as we can, and that you're making a difference to climate change and inner city air pollution and all those things that are really close to our heart, our sister company, Octopus Energy's heart, and then obviously our CEO, Fiona, as well. But also that we're not doing it too quickly. And when you have your car for 3 months, if you're going for coffee on the green, or if we can go to the pub again, in those 3 months' time, you're going down and you're telling everybody about how much you love your car, rather than actually, do you know what, that car that I got, it's just not right. It just doesn't do what I need it to do. It doesn't go as far as I wanted it to go. Or do you know what, it goes too far and I'm spending too much money. And I didn't realize I could have got a standard range plus instead of a long range, and all those kinds of things. And that's what's really, really crucial to me. Now, I know, Cyril, there's a favorite question. So there's a thing here about silly questions and non-silly questions. And the questions that we've got here today, we have rephrased just to make sure that nobody feels like we are maybe making fun of them or anything like that. We're rephrasing a whole load of questions. But I want to point out that we get asked what could be seen by others as silly questions all the time. And I think what that really tells me is that, yes, if we look at it with one set of eyes, this is a really silly question. But if we look at it through another scope, it's actually somebody that's done some research, had a think about some things, and then has actually come with a really critical and easy question. And what I mean by that is, like, it's a really good question to ask as well. So what I would ask is, if you have got any questions at all, please don't feel that we will in any way call you out or say that they're silly or say that they're stupid, because they're not, because you're thinking about that. So we need to answer that in as best way we can. For some people who are already into their EVs, those questions can seem really silly, and we can understand why there might be a little bit of apprehension. But also, if you enjoy this and you do have a question and you don't want to field it publicly, you can absolutely email us in, tweet us on Twitter, maybe a DM or something like that. And on the next one, we'll look to make sure we get that question in and we get looking after it, and we make sure that we'll reword it just so that everybody understands what we're going through, and what's going on there. Cyril, what do you think to that?
That's great. It's funny you mentioned that, because there's a question that keeps on coming up, and a customer first asked it to me, and then I realized that I actually didn't think about it myself, which is, when you think about it, it's silly. Is people always ask what happens when it's raining when I'm charging my car. You know, I didn't actually think about that. When I first got my first electric car, I was sent to charge it. It was raining actually. I just went out, plugged the car in, didn't think about it. When the person asked me that, I was like, no, actually, you're right. There's electricity, there's water. Usually that is a bad combination. So it's one of those questions that people think I shouldn't ask that, but in reality, how does it work? Is it possible? Can I do it? And the straightforward answer is in essence, is yes. I don't know the technical remits of how it's done, but I do know that the charger will actually intercept first and make sure that there isn't any, mostly dust particles, but any little particles like water particles in there, molecules that will go in and actually obviously mainly cause a short circuit before actually electrifying you on there.
Yeah, really clever actually. It's done with this device here, and the top 2 pins have a very low current, and they produce data. So they send data backwards and forwards, and only once they are totally matched and totally happy, and the car is happy and the unit's happy, does it send electricity along. But if you don't know that, you totally get that you don't go and mow your lawn in the rain because you might hurt yourself. So totally understand that. I suppose we've been here 10 minutes. Should we get cracked on and get the first question?
Yeah.
So what's happening is that, as I said, Ollie is on the other end of the internet, and he is going to send me some questions that are coming in. I see a couple that have already come in. So thank you so much. We'll get Cyril to answer those at the right time. They probably fit into a little bit later about plugging your car in and some other stuff there. Some bits about charging. And then we've also got some questions around cost. Now, we can absolutely run into that and have a look at that towards the end. However, that does become a much more personal question. So I think you can give us some indicative pricing on some stuff, but beyond that, we'll really need to learn you inside out, if that makes sense. However, first question coming up, I think it's really, really relevant, is the 2030 ban. With the new ban coming in for petrol and diesel cars, do you think that the necessary infrastructure will be in place?
Oh, that is a binary question, but it's actually a little bit more weighted than that, isn't it? I'll give you my experience. From when I started in Octopus electric vehicles, I've only been here, say, a year and a half. Just alone, the electric cars that have come into the market, let alone the infrastructure, has been a massive shift in that year and a half. So I think in 10 years' time, the push has to be there. And the money is there as well, because I live in an area where the local council is promoting and actually actively trying to get charging points out so people know where they can go and charge their cars. Like around me, there's probably about 4 charging points. So I'm one of the lucky few. While my neighbouring council, it isn't the same there, even though we're all in the London borough, London area. So it's about the more people that ask, especially with your local areas, the more that things will get done in that sense. If everyone just says there isn't a charger, there won't be one. So if you actively ask your council, your council's been given money to actually provide, and those are sitting there waiting to be used, but they need people to actually ask. The more that people ask, the more that will get set up. When you think about motorway driving and what you find out, where the charging points are there, majority of the major motorways there have a charging point for EVs. It's about getting the right amount of EV chargers there, so you have the right amount of influx once it goes up and carries on. If we're living in a magical circle world where I think miracles will happen and things will happen, I would hope that a few fuel stations will change and have more charging points in them, because what's stopping that from happening? But we will see. But I definitely think that the infrastructure will take place. If you look at our neighbouring countries in Europe, they're definitely...
That's exactly what I was going to say, Cyril. I've had the benefit of driving through some countries that have similar infrastructure to us, or did have similar infrastructure to us, and have grown exponentially. I've had the benefit of going to some countries that have much better infrastructure than the UK. And I've also had the benefit, believe it or not, of going to some countries that had no infrastructure. When I took some cars from Abu Dhabi to Muscat in Oman, from Abu Dhabi in the UAE to Muscat in Oman, when we entered Oman, there were no public chargers. And we opened some along our way. But I think the thing that a lot of people forget in this situation, and this isn't calling people out that have asked this question, because I get it, but it's also that every single building, or nearly every single building in this country, has electricity going into it. Yeah. So actually the infrastructure is really easy to create. It's about making sure that it's right. People can access it. It's in the location that you want to use it. And I think it's about changing your mindset slightly about, well, I stop here for 6 minutes because it takes me 4 minutes to fill up and 2 minutes to pay, and actually going, right, where do I want to stop for 20 minutes and have lunch while I'm driving? Where do I stop the car for 2 hours, like the cinema, for example, depending on what happens with the big C word? Do we go back to the cinema? Do I charge while I'm there? Or a shopping mall, or when I go out for dinner? And I think that's a change. You wouldn't ever think about fueling your car while you're at dinner, but now you can. And I think that's where we'll see the most clever businesses. And I don't mean charging infrastructure businesses. I mean, just random businesses will make huge headway into that, whereas other ones maybe won't be bothered. Starbucks, Costa, they could start their own little rivalry, right? Free charge when you get a coffee, something like that, or vice versa, free coffee when you charge. That could be a really cool way for those businesses to sort of start thinking about that. And I think that's where we will see the greatest growth. What do you think?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's also, as well, as the range of vehicles grow, I think when you think about it, in the States, the Model 3 is like grossly one of the biggest selling cars growing up over there at the moment. They should have more range anxiety than us. To go to the shops over there is like a 40-minute drive, while with us it's like, it's round the corner really. There's no way in the UK that most EVs won't manage on a 1-4 charge. But you're right, it's about changing that mindset and that concept that, like I always say, it's like treated like a mobile phone. You don't let your mobile phone go completely to the red. So it's like when you fuel your car with your combustion engine, you run it to the red, but with your electric car, you don't do that. So it's back to what you were saying about just recognizing something.
Yeah, very, very interestingly, we've had a comment on YouTube from somebody that says, I think the question of EV infrastructure may be more around the UK grid constraints and generation potential. And actually, there's a lot to be said in that. Sister company Octopus Energy is working really hard about that. Totally get that. But also with the announcement of the 10-step plan, if you go in and read that, there's a lot about wind generation. And wind is actually at its prevalence or at its most extreme overnight. And we could all be charging at that time. But things like Powerloop, so our vehicle to grid trial, OVO's vehicle to grid trial, and then some other stuff that's happening in the business sector, they're both personal. They have huge ways of looking at containing that. And actually, there's a brilliant video that Ollie has access to, which he can post at some point. We'll get that over to you, about Chris Harris speaking to the director of the National Grid. And that's a really interesting video. We can link you into that and give you all the updates on that, or join the Powerloop workshop and you can see what we're doing there as well. But totally take your point, Lee. But I think moving on, that will be that will be less for us as consumers to worry about, and much more about our energy companies and about our car companies to worry about. Would you agree, Cyril?
100%. And I think the other thing, I wouldn't say positive about COVID, but the one thing we've all realized in COVID is we probably don't need to drive as much as we do. I think that's definitely something I've taken off there, is I don't need to be in the car as often as I thought I did before now. There's a lot more walking.
Absolutely. So moving on to question 2. Given the recent news, there's a much greater attention on EVs. At the moment, they seem pretty expensive compared to an ICE. So that would be an internal combustion engine car. So if at any point we say ICE in this conversation, we're talking about an internal combustion engine car. which is slightly off-putting. So the cost comparison is slightly off-putting. Are there any long-term savings associated with owning an EV? Because some of the initial costs seem fairly high. Now, first up, I'm going to put out there that absolutely, if you look at the top line figure, of the cost of a car compared to another, you're absolutely right. It's going to look like it's really expensive. However, if you look at monthly costs become much more in line once you start adding in some other things. But Cyril is the guy that understands monthly costs and how that all works better than anybody else. So I'll pass that over to him, I think.
I think Charlie's right about the fact that, yes, when you look at the overall cost of the vehicle, it is definitely more expensive than a combustion car. But back to his point of the difference in pricing. So let's say, for instance, the Renault Zoe is costing £250 on a lease, and the Clio, which is probably the equivalent, is £199 or £150 at a push on there. From the naked point of view, you look at it and think that is a massive difference there. Blah blah. I don't want to do that. I can't justify going across that because it seems more costly. I want to do my bit for the environment and so on. And then once you break it down and actually look at the costing of what you fuel on a daily basis. So take, for instance, if you're doing about 10,000 miles a year, your fuel cost is probably circa, let's say, on a monthly basis, like £80. Is that a fair synopsis? Maybe 2 weeks, £40 on top of fuel, another 2 weeks on there. If you've got a very fuel efficient car, great. Might not be that merit for you on there, but those who are that privileged, then it comes into that. So when you look at the cost of the fuel, so for instance, what we do at Octopus Electric Vehicles is let's say you purchase a car from us, we give you 8,000 miles free worth of charging. Now, that is based on you charging on our low tariff between 12:30 to 4:30 a.m. Now, that 8,000 miles worth of free charging is actually a credit of £100. So that's 8,000 miles in a year. That's £100 versus, even if I gave you a best case scenario saying you're paying like £60 a month, it's still not an arguable case when you're looking at how much it would cost you long life for that. And then there's those slightly longer trips that you would take as well, especially now the range is going on the vehicles. So give you an example, my sister lives in Norwich, I live in London. To go up to Norwich to her, that's going to cost me circa £30-40 thereabouts in a combustion car. If I charge up a car in a public charging, not even at my home, £10-50 at the worst, and that's all it will cost me there and back. So that's a massive difference for me in costing there. So it's about looking at the complete picture of it and actually how much it's going to cost you in the life of the car, rather than just fixated on the monthly payment, as we were saying when Charlie was saying in the beginning. That's what confuses people when they start to look at it. And in the year and a half I've been here, I've seen that divide narrowing and narrowing and narrowing and getting smaller and smaller. As in, the manufacturers themselves are realizing that they have to join in the bandwagon, and they're introducing more vehicles and actually looking at their pricing more as well to make it more in line with what the consumer wants. So I think in probably maybe like 6 months' time, that gap that we're seeing there is a lot smaller, because in the last year and a half, it's reduced massively. Massively. Before it was borderline on the cusp, but now it's like it's a definite saving.
To put that into perspective, when I joined Tesla, so I joined Tesla in 2014, the base Tesla cost £74,000 and top of the range cost £135,000. Those same cars now are circa £40,000 cheaper.
Yeah.
And that's just, now £40,000 is a lot of money, and therefore £40,000, £45,000 is a lot of money. But also to see like a close to 60 to 40% reduction in the cost of that car as well is huge. So I think that only stands that in the future we'll see these costs drive lower and lower and lower. On the next question, we have, if I have an EV now, what are the prospects of me being able to resell it in a few years' time? Now, I think this is a really poignant question, because hopefully from my accent, you can tell I'm not from London, even though I'm living in London at the moment. And actually, in some parts of Scotland, electric cars are appreciating. And in other parts, they're depreciating. And it all starts to become a little bit of a lottery right now. Now, we're hoping that with more adoption, that will change. And also with leasing, that will change. But we don't just want to focus on leasing on this, because we know we are a leasing business. But we also feel that there are, for some people, it doesn't always work. Right, Cyril?
Yeah.
And actually, what are your options when you come to selling a car?
What, at the end of a lease, or are we just saying in general?
Just in general, in terms of anything, what are the protections, I suppose, that a consumer may have with a lease and without a lease?
None. The market is depending on the market, I always say. So yeah, and that's the interesting point with electric cars. Is I was actually speaking to someone about it today. So let's say, for instance, a VW Golf. I say to you, if I buy a VW Golf 3 years old, what do you think it's going to be worth? Everyone will be able to give you a guesstimate price of what they think it'll be worth. With an electric car, because it's new, it's a little bit difficult to pinpoint where the market will be, because the market is then reliant on the consumers who are buying it at that time. And if there shows an influx of, people wanting electric cars like we have done since the lockdown, it pushes the end pricing then for the resale value. So what a lot of EV drivers are doing, for two reasons: because of the residual value, they're buying the cars on a lease, but also protecting themselves, because every 2 years the technology is improving. In fact, in the last year and a half, it's increased surfold on there. I think, Charlie, your story of what you did with when you sold your EV, that is a good insight into literally how from one place and 1 month and another time it can be completely different. And it's just...
Yeah. So back in 2012, I bought a Renault Twizy. It was one of the first in Scotland, non-commercially. And coming on to some questions, there's some questions that have come up on YouTube that we can cover once we've discussed this. But actually, I bought that car. They reduced the cost of the car for me because they wanted to be the first dealership in Scotland to sell this car. And I bought it for about £4,000 when the car was worth circa 7,000. And I drove it for a year. And then I started to be getting offers from Nissan, from Abarth, to go racing. And actually, take this car to a circuit was really hard because its range was tiny. And actually, the reason I bought it was that it was cheaper than the bus. So I moved away from this car and I went into a dealership and looked to trade it in. And they wanted to offer me like £3,000 for it. I then was like, nah, I don't think that's right, because that's not just reduced from the value that I paid for it. Like, that's £5,000 in the space of a year less than it was worth a year ago. So I had a quick look online and found that in London, my car was selling for £6,500. So after some work, after speaking to my mum and dad and working this all out, what we did was we actually just sold it in London and had it transported down. And I think that gives a real idea of where there are a concentration of electric cars at the moment. We see that they understand their value is going up. And in certain areas where there's not a large concentration or people don't understand the cars, we see that the residual value can drop. Now, Scotland, when I was speaking about Scotland, actually, it's the islands where we're seeing huge appreciation of electric vehicles. Because if your island is 30 miles round, do you care if your car can do 60 miles? Do you care if your car can do 120? Of course not. Because you can get round the island twice. Why would I need to go round the island twice in a day? So I think that's a big thing there. And I suppose that's where leasing, we're hoping that beyond just looking after the customer, if you lease a car, but also in 3-4 years' time, when those leases are up, we start to see a stagnation or or a base sort of residual value across the board, right, Cyril, where the more cars that we can sell, and I don't mean this to you, I mean the more cars in general that are electric that get sold, the more that residual value starts to sort of
There's a pattern.
flatten out. Yeah.
At the moment, there isn't a certified pattern. The only people who've probably got patterns will be Tesla, because they've been around for a little bit longer with the EVs, that you can kind of predict where it's going to go. Yeah.
Absolutely. And to come on to that, with leasing, you just don't worry about that at all. You pay your monthly, just like Marvin says about mobile phones. And that's the beauty of it. You stay with a car for 2 years, 3 years, and in that time, you then just move in to something else and you get the latest and greatest. So maybe, I've got an iPhone 11 Pro Max. I look at the 12 and I'm like, oh, that's beautiful. But do I really need that level of tech today? Probably not. What I'll do is I'll wait until next year till my contract's up and just move in and skip that generation. I think also, if you constantly just jump from generation to generation to generation, you never fully appreciate just how much better it's got. You just take little things for granted. Oh, that camera's got a little bit better, or that camera. But when you go from one to the other, you go, oh wow, that's huge. I think that's really cool for me. Cool, amazing. So moving on to the next question, and we'll probably do these two questions together. So with colder weather at the moment, how much is the advertised range of an EV impacted? That's a brilliant question, because we see that some EVs are hugely hit, some EVs aren't, and there's all to do with what manufacturers have put in place. But also linked to this, does extreme weather make driving an electric car more dangerous than a conventional car? Now, straight up, I want to say that driving an electric vehicle in the snow and in the ice and in the wet weather is actually much safer than driving a petrol car. Now, take that with a pinch of salt when you understand that the majority of Teslas are much more high powered than the majority of saloon powered vehicles. So there is a bit there about high power vehicles. But if you take to put it into perspective, a standard Tesla Model 3 is about as fast as a 3 or 4 year old BMW M4. So that on the snow is utterly shocking. But the reason that this becomes so much safer is because of traction control and also the digitization of grip. Now, I've just made up that phrase right there, but it's probably the easiest way to describe that. And we'll come on to the cold weather range stuff, but I just wanted to cover the safety aspect first. When we look at an electric motor, it spins up much faster and much slower than a traditional petrol engine car. And if we have a dual motor, if we have an all-wheel drive system, we have a front and rear motor. We don't have one motor powering off all. So that allows us to not only speed up and slow down the axles independently of one another, we can also do the opposite while the other axle is doing the opposite, which we cannot do with a petrol car. We can slow the wheels down and we can slow some down faster than others, and we can speed some up faster than others, but we can't slow some down while speeding others up. That is basically impossible. But with an electric car, we can definitely do this. And the easiest way to think about it is if you imagine a candle versus a dimmer switch. I could light a candle now and cover it, and it would take 3 or 4 seconds to go out. Because your petrol engine runs on fire, it's very similar. It doesn't take the same amount of time, it's much quicker, but that length of time is similar. With a dimmer switch, I could walk up to my lights just now, turn the dimmer switch, and instantly we're at that level of light. Now, in one output, it's about 6 times faster. So in one instance of wheel spin, it's about 6 times faster. But we don't ever just have one instance of wheel spin. We have an instance of wheel spin followed by the car trying to correct itself, trying to find grip again. And in that instance, an electric car can be 100 times quicker at making those decisions that save your life than a traditional petrol engined car. It also comes to life when you think of the front wheels crossing a piece of ice and being able to slow down while the rear wheels push the car across that piece of ice. The electric motor can fire them straight back up again. And as the rear wheels hit that ice, the car already knows there is a low friction surface about to hit and can slow those rear wheels down to the speed that the front wheels got grip again. So it's a strange one to overcome, and we can go into it in much greater detail, but absolutely. Now, to come on to the technicalities of batteries and advertised ranges dropping, that's all to do with the sponge inside the water bottle. Now, if you don't get what I mean by that, that's how I think of battery chemistry. I think of batteries like a water bottle with a sponge in it. When we talk about lithium ion, what we're talking about is the sponge that's in the water bottle. If you imagine that sponge getting cold, it might get crispy. It might get really hard to squeeze. And when we squeeze, we're extracting water, right? We're extracting electricity. And when we fill it back up, there might be some frost in there that doesn't let us get the full potential of that battery. That is why we see a drop off or a reduction in the winter. And sometimes in some vehicles, that can be really large. That can be like 30, 40%. However, that's with much older cars because manufacturers realized this was happening and started to make some changes. So what we can do is we can always keep the battery at a temperature, and we use a heat pump to do that. Or we circulate a fluid, a bit like a hot water bottle, to keep those water bottles that we have at the right kind of temperature. Finally, what we can do is while the car's plugged in, we can actually preheat the car. So we can have that car thermally manage itself and bring itself up to a temperature where those batteries work better. And in that situation, we see a 10 to 20% drop off, which is much, much, much less. And why I say 10 to 20% is because if you're doing everything right, you're driving it well, you're thinking about how to drive it, you're working the throttle well, and you've preheated the car while it's being plugged in, turned off the heater, and just using the seat heaters, you'll see 7 to 10% drop off for that cold weather. If you walk out to your car and it's sat at 3 degrees internally and you use the battery electricity to heat that car up, that takes a lot of energy. So while the car's plugged in, wander on down to it if you don't have a car that connects to your phone, or the majority of new cars now connect to your phone and you can simply sit there and heat it up while you're away from the car. To give you an example of this, a member of or somebody that's just taken a car on salary sacrifice is using one of our cars because there's been a problem, and is able to drive that car about. I can see where that car is on my phone, even though it's not at my house because it's mine, kind of. And I can heat and cool that if I wanted. I'm not going to, but it is funny when Cyril borrows the car that at 2:30 in the morning I start pressing the horn just to wind him and his neighbours up. But it's to give you an idea of what you can do to negate that. Now, new cars, a lot of them are having heat pumps integrated. I think the new Kia e-Niro has a heat pump coming. The Tesla Model 3, the brand new one, has a heat pump. And that makes an even bigger difference to that 7 to 9%. So hopefully that covers off those questions. If it doesn't, please pop something in the questions and Ollie will get those over to me. That would be amazing. So Cyril, there's also a question we've kind of missed, but I'll bring that into this one as well, is that what happens if something goes wrong? So if I have a breakdown, what's the potential of these cars going wrong? What happens if I crash my car when it's on lease? Or if I have a crash, how safe is it? What do you know about that?
I'll probably start with the RAC one, or just any kind of covers, any kind of roadside assistance. We don't favour anyone. So with most manufacturers, in fact, every manufacturer, you are given 12 months roadside assistance for the vehicle. All their tech specialists that they will send out to you will be able to look at your electric car. If your car is at a point where it won't move, same as a combustion car, you will be taken to your local garage. So the functionalities of your roadside assistance is still the same. It's just if there is ever an issue, your car will have to be taken in. So if your car is not movable, same as your combustion engine, in the nicest way in the world, no one with a roadside is going to be able to fix your car if it's completely gone. It's going to be the same principle. I think that there's sometimes because it's new, we possibly overthink the parameters of what there is on there, and it's still the same situation with it. Sorry, what was the other part of the question?
No, that's brilliant. I just want to cut in at that point and say, so I'm a huge Formula One fan. And to give you a wee bit of an idea, like Lewis, I love using this analogy because it's really simple to visualize. Lewis Hamilton's car, right? Everything on his car is built to make the car move forward. He doesn't have a radio that can change channel. He doesn't have like windows either with a motor or with a roller or doors or anything like that. Basically, his car, everything that moves is built to make the car go faster, right? His car has about 40,000 moving parts on it. Now, to a lot of people, they sit there and go, well, that then means that my petrol car isn't as cool as Lewis Hamilton's car and it will only have like 20,000. It's actually the other way around. They want to reduce the moving parts because it reduces reliability the more moving parts they have. So, it reduces reliability the more moving parts they have. So Lewis's car is as stripped down as possible, and it has 40,000 moving parts. The Tesla Model 3 that I normally have sat on my driveway has 41. Not 41,000, 41 moving parts that would push the car forward. So absolutely, there's a whole load that could go wrong, but just the chances of those going wrong are less because there's less bits. But also because there are less bits, it makes it easier to diagnose. The car can normally do it itself, and the repairs are modular. Now, what do I mean by the repairs are modular? The car can come in, and if your turbo went in your petrol car, they would have to take the turbo off, and then because everything's interlinked, put a new turbo on, but check the engine, make sure none of the blades had come into the engine, make sure that none of the oil was affected, do a wash, maybe do a cam belt change, do a whole load of things that all start from one bit having a problem. Whereas with an electric car, you unbolt that motor, you take it off, and you just bolt a brand new one in, and away you go. Also, on top of that, the cars connect to the internet, so they're able to sense kind of what's going wrong and send that back to base, dependent on the car. Now, I think Tesla, Porsche, the VW will, Polestar does, a whole load of these cars are able to do this.
I think the other brands are not quite there yet on there. But yeah, your higher brands
get there, right? They'll have to get there.
Yeah. Because the technology is out there, it's just they're putting it out there, and it's bridging that thing with the pricing as well when it comes down to it. And I think that's where the struggle is.
Yeah, and I think that starts to become an interesting scenario, doesn't it, Cyril, as well, about is this too soon for some people? And I would hark it back to when my granny was looking at buying an iPad. She would always try and buy the best one. And I'd be like, but in 6 months' time, there's going to be a better one. And she'd be like, oh, I'll wait for that one then. And it'd be like, but actually, once that one's come out, there's probably something new that will be right around the corner. I'll just wait for that one then. And then actually, you're never
actually waiting.
Yeah, and you're always waiting. And actually, if it does the job for you and it's reliable and it's covered by a warranty, then are you now touch wood, nothing ever goes wrong. There can be instances where stuff does go wrong, right, Cyril? Yeah,
definitely.
My mum experienced it with a certain brand in a diesel car. but
it's a machine. It's a machine.
You do have a backup, right? You do have the manufacturers not taking a punt that these cars are more reliable. They're giving them big warranties because they know they will be, right?
Yeah, and I think the question is more born out of fear of, if ever I get stranded somewhere, will I be stranded there for God knows how long? That's never going to be the case. Worst case scenario, let's say if there's a fault on your car that the technician can't fix on site, you'll be taken somewhere where, like Charlie says, there'll be a workshop, you can plug it in, look at the car and sort it out. Like with the Tesla Charlie was saying, it will read the data and send it to them already. With other manufacturers, they won't have that capabilities, but your car will still go into the workshop, same as your combustion car. So it's the stop time, and I think that's what everyone's probably worried about. When actually my car can't be fixed on the side of the road, what will happen? It will still be the same principle as your combustion car. You'll be taken into a local garage and it will be sorted. And I'm sure if you're covered with insurance, there'll be a courtesy car and so forth for you to go home. So you'll never be out of sorts with an electric car in that sense.
Amazing. So we have some questions. I've seen there's one coming in about 300 miles and stopping and charging and stuff like that. We'll come on and cover that in a second because we're going to talk about charging. I think we're going to move slightly towards charging now. But we have some questions around charging. And the one that we had planned was, or that we'd seen come up a lot, was, I don't have off-street parking, so where can I charge my car? Which is a brilliant question, right? But also we see a lot around, so questions come in from Evan, who's like, my car parking space is about 50 meters from my home. Does this present a problem? Which I think can tie in. So short answer, yes. Long answer, we'll answer it just now. And then we have some other stuff around let me see, where was it? Cool. So we have some stuff around that. And then also, I think that leans into what trends are you seeing and learning about the hybrid versus electric market? Because I think the big thing that makes people go for hybrids is that idea that they are self-charging, not pointing any elbows at any brands anywhere, that happen to make one of the greatest hot hatches and one of the last amazing petrol vehicles that rhymes with Boyota. But we won't make fun of them. But I think that it's the charging aspect that makes people worry a little bit about moving away from a hybrid, right? Would you agree?
Yeah, I'll give a good example. So I have a customer who wants to go EV and generally think it's the right thing to do. Just not even on savings, just on the environmental side of it, of actually the impact on what they're doing. Doesn't use their car that often, use it enough to need a car, but then takes a trip. That's an important trip, maybe once a month. But when they go on that trip, there isn't anywhere to park because there isn't anywhere to plug their car in, do anything, because the person they're staying with hasn't got that facility for them to do it. And it was an interesting conversation because it was leaning towards the person going for a hybrid because it made more logical sense because of that sense of, I can take a little bit of the battery, that small battery, and use that on my daily trips. And then when I have a big trip, I can actually use the petrol side of it. And we went around in a conversation and still came back to the fact of, there are EVs out there that will give you that range. And then we talked about the whole, when I stop off, how long do I stop off in a garage for? Am I in there for like 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes? Because when you do a long trip, most people stop. So when you go pay for your fuel, go and get a sandwich and so forth, you've probably spent 30 minutes and not realized it. The difference is you plug in a car and then go for it. And then the whole EV versus hybrid, going back to that, it's, for me, I think it's either range anxiety or they think, I haven't got anywhere to charge. Let me get something that will double up and I can use a little bit when I maybe go to Tesco's and they've got plug-in charging there, or like we talked about, the self-charging ones there. The reality is, I think a lot more people are swinging towards EVs because the range has got to the point now where it's not a question anymore. It's just about, like we were saying earlier on, how do you readopt the way you view it, as in it's not going to be a burden on my life. I can actually just literally take a car on a short journey as I do, and it's never going to run out. Because I think traditionally when people think of electric cars, they still think of stuff like the G-Wiz with a range of 30 miles or so, where now at the point where when you hear an EV's got 163, we say that's not enough. We're now talking over 200. So I think in the next, and I keep on saying this to customers, in the next 6 months, we're going to see, hopefully, if things are going to be released when they are, an influx of EVs that will start hopefully demolishing hybrids, because we're not massive fans.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think coming back to that idea of charging away from your home, right?
Yeah.
If you don't have a garage or a driveway, which is always the best case scenario. Yeah. And I don't want to pull the wool over your eyes and suggest that it's as easy to have an electric car without a driveway. I, with my Twizy, didn't have a driveway. I lived on the 5th floor of a 15-story flat in Paisley, which is right next to Glasgow Airport. And I used to have chargers in my work. So that's how I stayed charged. And I would charge maybe every other day, but then I had a very, very short range. And I think this is where that idea of that infrastructure growth, we really need to see that and have an understanding of that for people that don't have a driveway. Now, if you're 50 meters away from your parking spaces, 50 meters away from your home, there are options depending on whether you own the land and depending on how much money you want to spend to get it out. It's not quite as simple as, running an extension cord all the way out there. Not that I ever did that with my Renault Twizy outside my window when I was desperate on charge. Never, ever, ever. But there are some things around Ionity and VW and the way they're looking at some stuff with on street. Their idea is to have fast charge, like super fast chargers at shopping centers or supermarkets, and when you go to shop, you'll fill up nice and quickly. Other places, other people are looking at destination charging. So Tesla look at this idea that when you get somewhere nice, you can charge the car up slowly, and then you've got the superchargers for longer distance. And then we actually see in London a lot of trials and some companies that are doing things properly now, aren't we? We've seen Trojan Energy that have a lance that goes into the ground. That looks like a cool project. Connected Curb, which looks really clever as well, which is where all the charging stuff is in underneath the roadside, and then you just have a little mound that you can plug into. And then we also see what's the word I'm looking for there, Cyril? Lamppost charging. There we go. So lampposts have enough power to help charge your EV, and an overnight charge on one of those, if you're doing 20, 30 miles, is going to keep you going a day. It's going to keep you going for circa a week, right? So I'm not saying that right now we're in a position where everybody could move and we'd be all hunky-dory, but we are growing that quite quickly, and that is growing and growing and growing. And actually, that I think is the golden ticket, right? Is to be able to do these sorts of chargers, to be able to charge slowly. Slow charging is always the best charging. Slow charging while you're asleep is always the best charging as well. And then it comes to, how do we pay for that? And not for the infrastructure, but how do we actually charge, and how do you buy the energy from that charging provider? Now, we've already talked about 5, and that can get very complicated. But there are other options out there, like Electric Juice from Octopus, and also Electric Juice Network from Octopus, and also contactless payment. You'll soon be able to, swipe every rapid charger with your contactless and be all good. But from my point of view, from having had a car where I had to do that, I saw the very early days where it was really, really hard, and now starting to see it grow and become much easier. And even if it's not possible today, like I was saying, waiting 3 months or maybe 6 months and us knowing when it's right for you. So I think it's really important that you speak to us, Cyril, very probably, and he can help make sure that exactly what you are looking for or what you're looking to achieve can be done. And if it can't be done, we'll work out the car of the future that can do it. Maybe it's a Cybertruck and you take it to a supercharger once a month, and you live in it the rest of the time. Or maybe it's live in your Porsche Taycan and take it to Ionities, because you can live in a car, you can't drive your house. But there's lots of other things around that we can look, and those are I'm joking about those kinds of things, but actually there's a lot of options out there, right, where we can get that sorted. And that payment system, that idea of swiping one card and all billing back, and it doesn't really matter who you're charging with, is actually probably the big thing to look at, and the big thing moving forward, where a lot of work is being done. The government are looking at it. Octopus Energy are looking at it, and they're using me as a beta tester to go out and try that. And you can sign up and you can become a beta tester as well. If you already have an EV, you can sign up, pop it on either to your Octopus Energy account or just pay a direct debit for this. However, you won't get phone calls at 3:30 on a Friday afternoon from Matt Davis asking if you can go and charge at a certain charger somewhere in your local vicinity to see if it works, or can you spend 4 hours traipsing around Worcestershire to try and find the 3 chargers that they need to double check are working. However, you won't be expected to do that. You'll just use it and it will fit into your life. And I think something that's really important is that Chris Harris talks about the idea that cars, the difference between a taxi and a car is that with a taxi, you have to fit your lifestyle around your travel. So if you get the train or a taxi or a bus, you have to fit your lifestyle around your movement. Whereas a car is much more about that fitting into your lifestyle. And actually, it's really important that we get that right. And that's why we need to help discuss that and have a chat about that. So do you think that covers the charging question enough?
Yeah, do you know, I was going to ask you a question that, do you think in, let's say, maybe 3 or 4 years, kind of like the VHS versus beta kind of thing, there will be like some kind of battle between how do we do if you haven't got, especially in London, let's think about London for an instance, not everyone in London has the luxury of having off-street parking, but everyone has a car. So there's a lot, like you were talking about, all the technology that's coming through. Do you think that at some point there's going to be someone who's going to have like a tipping point moment, so to speak, that's going to revolution everything? It's going to like change, or do you think it's going to be a mishmash of things?
So we get this question come up a lot, the question before, where we look at off street, and some about that idea of driving 300 miles and stopping stopping for a coffee and a lube break. Like that makes absolute sense. But then you start to think of every single time a new technology, and this is maybe going a bit left field and a bit moving away from Octopus EV and moving into Charlie's brain. But every time we've seen a shift in technology that moves people, whether that be the invention of a sailboat or the Vikings having the best sailboats of the time, they were able to go and take over vast swathes of Northern Europe and then America, some of it, if they believe what they found in Nova Scotia. When we saw the steam train arrive, we saw the start of the Industrial Revolution, right? And we started to see a whole lot of things. Then we saw the plane and globalization really start to take off. And I think we're seeing something similar here, is that actually all these questions around charging and thinking about that and how that works is short-term problems. And short-term, I mean 10, 15 years. And outside of that, you will have a solution, whether that be from Tesla, VW, Apple, Google, Uber, one of those big companies, that you hit a couple of buttons on whatever your phone will be at that point, and or your watch or whatnot, and something comes and picks you up, and it's fully electric, and it doesn't pollute the environment, and it doesn't have terrible emissions from its brakes or from its tires or from anything like that. And then you get out at your destination and it goes off and it worries about charging by itself. And whether that be autonomous or you drive it, I don't know yet. But I think there's a huge shift in the way that
we consume
will be. And I think if you live in my mum lives on the first story of a tenement flat in Glasgow. She'd love an EV. Can she get one right now? Yes and no. She couldn't a year ago, but she could now, because of the way her life is changing and slowing down, and also the other cars that are on the market and where her budget is. But beyond that, if she could just get to work by pressing a couple of buttons on her iPad and something being outside and she can open it up and drive it, she drives it to work. She doesn't really care about the range. It maybe only needs to do 100 miles in a day because they'll all come back to BMW or VW or Google or Uber and charge themselves up. I don't know. And then coming back, I think that links very, very nicely to that idea of the grid as well. Like then all of a sudden we have huge batteries that can help supplement the grid as well. Like huge batteries, not all in one place, but all over the place that can supplement. So I think to come back to a lot of the questions we've had from people and from people on YouTube and from looking at questions, it's worrying about, like, if I get this now, I might be okay. But in 5 years' time, when everybody's doing this, what starts to happen? So right now, you could buy a car, plug in at a lamppost, you'd be absolutely fine. And in 3 years' time, I think you'll be absolutely fine as well. I think the lampposts will grow at the same rate as the cars will grow. And I think charging will only keep pace with cars, if not get quicker.
That's it, yeah.
But what happens when a switch gets flipped, like 2030, and everybody has to do it? I think we start to see changes in the way that we travel. And as a last thing, I can put that into sort of story in a picture for you. I used to travel before I was working at Octopus. I used to travel a lot to the west coast of the US. I used to fly over to Seattle and visit people in Portland. I did some stuff around Johnny Cash's old Rolls Royce that was being converted to having a Tesla drivetrain, which I wasn't allowed to speak about until they announced it. But also doing some stuff around looking with Swift EV, which is a company out there that are looking or had been looking to build a land speed record car that was fully electric before VW came in and made the IDR with about £100 million worth of development, which is just an utterly amazing car. But I would fly into Seattle. I'd pay $6 and I would get to use an internal combustion engine car, but I'd get to use a Mercedes C-Class to drive from the airport to Seattle. I'd then jump on a train from Seattle to Portland, and then I'd open up a BMW i3 when I got there, and I would drive the 3 or 4 miles to a friend's house, and then just leave the car at the side of the road. It would lock itself using my phone, and it would all be good. I'd walk away. The next morning, the car might still be there, or it might not. And it was a brilliant way of working. Now, I think they were slightly ahead of their time. But also, I see that being the golden ticket in terms of switching everybody is moving that way. I think with the big C word we've seen, we'll see a huge shift in transportation habits. I mean, we're doing this over Zoom rather than inviting you all down to the office, which would be a bit strange, but also like not inviting you down to a venue like a hotel and sitting having these conversations, which is partly why we're doing it, right? Because we can't do that at the moment. But also maybe this is just nicer. Maybe it's nicer to be able to have your feet warm and not worry about the weather outside. And maybe there's something around what we do with test drives when we can get back to doing that. Yeah. But there's one part of me that worries a little bit, or is a little bit sad about this, because I'm a huge fan of driving and a huge petrol head, or reformed petrol head, however you want to put it. But also I think that gives us the ability to have toys. It gives us the ability to have a pony in the garage, and I don't mean a horse. I mean an actual really cool, really nice car that we want to buy, rather than this sort of halfway house, which is what all the cool kids seem to want at the moment, is a normal practical car that's really fast. And that just doesn't make sense to me, because you're compromising all the time. You're compromising on comfort when you're driving to work. You're compromising on fuel economy or on electricity when you're driving to work. And then when you take it on a circuit or have fun at the weekend, you have this big, heavy car that can't go as quick as it could if it weighed 600 kilos less. So I think from a purely petrol head view, the future is bright, even with this idea of losing ownership of the car that takes you to work, but also that there's some work to be done in this space before we get there. And I think that's what we're doing, is really sort of helping people in that period now. So it depends if you're comfortable taking the jump, if you're comfortable taking that plunge, and Cyril will make sure that that plunge is as warm and as not from the highest diving board as possible. That's probably the best way of explaining what we do. Cyril, would you agree?
Yeah, listen, it's I think we're probably a little bit past the early adopter stage, aren't we, with a few of the vehicles that we're offering now. I think the only thing that's still at the early adopter stage is probably something like Powerloop, where you're getting people who are more adept with the electronic side of things that coming in there. But yeah, I think with us, it goes back to what we started at the beginning when we were talking. For us, it's about making the journey for you as a consumer a little bit more comfortable, a little bit more understanding, because a lot of it is alien. It is alien. When you don't know, it will seem like there's a lot of gobbledygook out there, and you have to consume it before you make a decision, which is one thing that always annoys me. And I always say to customers, don't worry, I don't think you're buying a £5 shirt. I don't expect you to make a decision with me over the phone right now. Have a discussion about it, because you're going to own this for 2 years, 3 years time. So it's about building that understanding first, and then let's then talk about the car and then going through it. It's not so let's just jump into it in that sense straight away.
But so Ollie has messaged me. I've seen there's a lot of messages coming in about price comparison and stuff that was mentioned earlier, which you can go back to once this ends. We're not going to take it down. It should stay on YouTube. Need to double check on some settings, but it's not there tonight. It will be there a little bit tomorrow. However, there's also a question around secondhand EVs. Do we lease them? And I think we don't is the very short and easy answer. Sorry? Currently. And I think that's the killer phrase there. And actually, a lot of people look at cars and see electric cars and see them as really expensive because there's not a secondhand market, or there's not a really strong secondhand market to fulfill all the demand. But also, Cyril, you used to work in ICE cars. I worked for a very strange ICE car manufacturer. I didn't really work for a car company. I worked for a
toy company.
Yeah, but was there not a little bit about, like, if you were selling a hatchback at this amount, customers, you were trying to tease customers away from buying a second-hand vehicle, which actually right now isn't to happen in the EV world?
Yeah, I think definitely it's pushed by the manufacturers to try and get you into a new car with all the incentives that they set up, especially with combustion cars. And I would say definitely with EVs, with leasing, it's constructed that way. I think the manufacturers have taken advantage of the fact that they know that EV drivers won't purchase a car because of how quick the technology evolves, that you're going to lease it. So you're fixated on monthly payments. By the time you start looking over, let's say, a few months, you start realizing it's about how much do I want to pay for a month, how much is it going to cost me to fuel it, to charge it, in essence. whilst with a combustion engine, Charlie's actually right. You go into a dealership and you're spoken to about monthly payments and directed by your monthly payments, whether it's a new or used car. And when you're looking at your 6-month-old cars, they are very close to your new cars when you're looking at pricing. And with EVs, because there isn't that many of them out there, you have a reluctance from the big brands, not like with Tesla, to probably do what you call like an X demo, because you have to have, I think the only way I could put it is, let's say, for instance, VW change all their vehicles to EVs, then you have an influx of used cars coming in through.
Yeah, and I think that covers something else that we've been asked, which will probably have to be the last question, because I understand we've kept you a little bit longer. But is around the novelty factor of manufacturers and when will that wear off? And I think we're actually seeing that this year. I think we're seeing that this year. We saw that in April. If you look at pre-April, Cyril, what could you sell?
Nissan Leaf.
A Tesla, 3 Teslas,
Jaguar
Nissan Leaf, half a Taycan. You could sell a Taycan, but the customer wasn't going to get it.
No.
And a Renault Zoe, right? Maybe a BMW i3. But now we're seeing cars from every manufacturer nearly on the market, and we only see more. And I think absolutely there's this idea that, oh, that's something we do on the side. Let's build this electric car on the side that just helps the market, helps us deal with the fact that some people are asking us to do it. And now you have Porsche, VW, and Honda. Now I'm going to, VW is a little bit of a red herring because I've not driven the car yet, and I don't think you have, Cyril. There is one locally, which once this lockdown's over, I am going to go and try out. But those two cars, especially for me, the Taycan and the Honda E, really signaled a watershed moment. Now, I'm ex-Tesla, so I understand how amazing a Tesla can be. And I'm not disparaging Tesla in any way, shape, or form here, because I think Tesla look at this EV game like it's one big problem. Like, they holistically look at it, and the car is actually just one part of their game, but to the consumer, it feels like everything. I drove the Taycan, and it wasn't a token gesture. It is the best Porsche on the market right now. It is the best car Porsche make. Not because it's electric, but because Porsche went, we're going to put all of our best guys and girls on this because we want this to signal a change in the way we do things. And funnily enough, the other car that I drove that felt like that was the Honda E. It was super easy. It was super quiet. Come back to that question that we did get about 70 miles an hour. Like, what's the noise internally like? All these manufacturers are doing big amount of work to make sure that internally you're not getting a horrible noise when you're at 70 miles an hour because you don't have a petrol engine to drown it out. And it's something that, believe it or not, is a bigger problem in the high-end luxury market than in the smaller low-end market, because in the lower-end market, the tires aren't built to stick to everything, so they're then not flicking up all the little stones, which means that you have a quieter, more enjoyable ride. Whereas if you go out and buy a sports car, like a Taycan, or if you've got silly amounts of money, the Rimac right now has a huge problem with, you can hear every single stone chip. You can hear every single stone chip. But that's because it's a prototype. And those cars have huge amounts of work put into them to make sure they're doubling down on all those noises. I mean, Cyril, you drove the Taycan with me when you could. It was a single rattle.
It was we had a drive day and we drove quite a few cars, and obviously the Taycan won, hands down. It wasn't even a debate. But I think the one thing I came out of when I spoke to Charlie when I drove it was like, once we did all the like, oh, let's put the pedal to the metal kind of things, after we drove it smoothly, I was like, do you know what? This is actually a really smooth car. For a car that was that low to the ground, that was the smoothest ride we had all day. Because normally, performance vehicles, when you get in them, now I will put my hand out there and say I drive like an old man, and I don't care if anyone laughs at me about it. I like my smooth ride, and that was a really smooth car. But when you put your your foot down, that car moved like, I think everyone screamed on the video, didn't they? I don't think there was anyone who didn't like make some kind of ungodly noise when they put their foot down.
Yeah. Somewhere connected to this video, there'll be another video you can go and check out on our channel. I think, everybody, that is as much time as we have for today. What I would ask is, Ollie, if you're listening, if you could pop Cyril's email address into the comments, that would be amazing. If you've got a burning question you need answered before tomorrow, not before tomorrow, but tomorrow, send Cyril a little email. He'll get you sorted.
I'll answer them tonight.
Yeah, cool. And if you have any questions, you can pop them in on Twitter. You can pop them in on Facebook. We'd love to hear from you. And what I'll try and do is tomorrow, I'll go through the chat as well, pick out some questions, see if I can answer those in the comment section of the video. So if there are questions that you didn't get answered today, what I'd love to do is if you could come back maybe tomorrow evening or on Thursday, and there should be some answers in that comment section for you. And I'll try and tag the time as well. So I'll pop in the time that was, and we should be good to go from there. But everybody that joined, thank you so much. And in true sort of Top Gear sort of style, I want to hand over back to Cyril in the studio. Is that the right way of saying it?
I think so. This is like my final word.
Yeah,
nothing planned, Charlie, but thank you. No, I think anyone who wants to try and find out about EVs, I think probably the first point of call is we've got some great workshops that actually Charlie does run. I think that is probably the first place to actually start, rather than, if you want to, you can still do that. Jumping on pricing, please go onto the workshops, come on there. They're a little bit more interactive than this because you actually get to ask questions right at the end, you can speak out and then get involved and actually hear what other people are saying and what we've got to do. And that's a good way of learning the kind of niche bits about it. And then we can start talking about pricing and investigating a little bit deeper for you.
Amazing, Cyril. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, Cyril. We look forward to seeing you. How about we do this?